Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now then, round 3 of the 2020 Guinness Six Nations has come and gone. The French have control of the tournament. England are very much back in it, and Ireland are licking their wounds, to say the least, after a 24 points to 12 loss at Twickenham yesterday, which doesn't quite tell the full story of England's dominance. We have with us Liam Toland. You're there, Liam?
I am indeed, Joe.
Keith Wood, hello.
Hiya, Joe. How are you doing?
Very well. So Andy Farrell was very honest in his post-match interview, Keith. He made the point that Ireland rallied, but only when realistically the game was over. He said we didn't fire a shot. He said we felt a bit sorry for ourselves in the first half. And he absolutely acknowledged that the scoreboard flattered Ireland. That first 40 minutes, that was as close to complete domination as it gets, really.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we were pinned inside our 22 for a huge amount of the first half. Getting out of it seemed to be a huge struggle for us. And when we did get out and we did get a chance to do something, we missed our opportunities. And we were rattled from the start. England got over the gain line from the very first carry from Tuilagi and didn't stop for the next 40 minutes. And look, I like the fact, I like Andy Farrell. I know he knows what it's like to win and he knows what it's like to lose. You're going to get nothing but honesty from him anyway, because that's in his makeup. And you know, in fairness, there was nothing else he could have said yesterday. It was a chastening day. Now, it's 3 times in the last 12 or 13 months that we've come across England and they've wiped the floor with us. And the only things you can say in a positive for that yesterday were it could have been 20 or 30 points more, and it was. We hung on unbelievably to suddenly just finish up 12 points down, and it does flatter us an awful lot. But there was a lot of not giving up in that team, but we were comprehensively beaten off the park.
Yeah. You mentioned Tuilagi's first carry. There were echoes of Dublin 2019 in that, Liam, and really there were things about this performance, this English performance, that we have seen before. Like Johnny Sexton made the point afterwards that any time when we did eventually get our hands on the ball that we tried to go wide, England defenders shot up outside us. They cut off the passes. Again, that was said after Dublin 2019. Andy Farrell said at times we tried to play too much rugby under pressure in our own half. Again, that was said in 2019. And just that general feeling of England boxing and squeezing Ireland in and these clever little kicks in behind. And none of this was new, and it felt like Ireland were a bit powerless to stop a repeat performance.
Well, against Scotland in the rain, England kicked in the first half 29 times. So Eddie Jones's side, although he brags a different style of rugby, Eddie Jones's side is very keen on kicking. And in fact, I think, feeding off what Keith just said there a moment ago, if Ford, who's a running out half, used his more instinctive attacking play, I think that's where England have the next phase of what they need to go to, is to, with all that power and dominance and the amount of time they spent in the French 22 in Paris and indeed in the Irish 22 in Twickenham, they're still leaving a lot of scores behind, and that's a big worry because they have huge power, and that's just the last piece of the jigsaw. I think Ireland, it was very obvious the game plan. England, from the very kick-off, if you saw the kick-off, a split kick-off, Curry in the number 8 jersey for England, he just targeted Stander. Clearly they were kicking to Stander, and Stander got the ball away and didn't get hit. But from the 22-metre kick-out off the missed penalty from Sexton, Tuilagi smashed Stander. So they were very much going, look, where are the Irish strengths? Stander's very much one, and we're just going to batter them. And the other thing is, we're going to play the game in their 22, and we see how they can manage to get out. And Ireland were unable to create a chaos. So the 13 white jerseys that were facing them, and you mentioned the midfield, I thought in the number 4 jersey for England, certainly the best player on the pitch by a country mile, Mario Itoje, was absolutely sensational. And to see his ability to read the Irish attack, and Courtney Lawes did it last season as well, and cut out the Irish midfield and create a lot of mismatches in many ways. And at no stage were Ireland able to create chaos in the white line and be able to really kind of target weak shoulders, and they started carrying the ball, standing start, the recycle was affected, and just the physical dominance of England just kept going and going. It ebbed away after the second half, But I think for all in Twickenham as I was, the damage was certainly done in that opening 40.
Well, Eddie Jones said we would have declared if it was cricket after the opening 40, and he was quite keen to tell everybody what a good performance it had been, maybe rightly so. Second half a bit unsatisfactory in a way as a contest, Keith. It's not the core point, and I do want to get back to Ireland. But, you know, you've got that a decent 10 minutes, Ireland's best 10 minutes of the game, and Henshaw finished very good. And then, I don't know, we seem to spend the next 15, 20 minutes bunched in the Irish 22. There were, I don't know how many scrums and stoppages and Jakob Piper, and I know England did win 2 scrums, but it just felt like all the impetus went out of the game, and then England bowled over for the third try, and that was kind of that. So it's kind of an unsatisfactory second half, even as a spectator, and especially from an Irish point of view, I suppose.
No, we needed an awful lot to go right. And just to pick up on Eddie Jones, is there a more graceless coach in the game? The manner in which he speaks. Yeah, I just find it, I don't know he does it for effect, but
sure,
that doesn't take away from the fact that it's pretty horrible.
Yeah. On Liam's point there about us taking the ball stationary, whatever the root cause of that is, whether it's slow ball or their physicality, but geez, you compare it to Tuilagi sprinting onto balls, and you think these Irish players know they can't take the ball stationary against this English team, and they must even be thinking on the pitch, how are we in this cycle?
I've just crossed my arms. I've gone into a defensive posture immediately. Right, I looked at it again. I looked at the game again this morning. So I watched it yesterday in the stadium. It was a pretty surreal and flat atmosphere. It was quite unusual because England were so much on top so quickly that even the English guys didn't get overly excited by it. But I looked at it again this morning, and you know, you're trying to find some bit of sense in all of these, and there's maybe 3 teams in the world at the moment that have figured out exactly how to play against Ireland. Now, I know Japan beat us in the World Cup, and they were extraordinary how they did it, but England, New Zealand, and I would say South Africa, in the manner in which they played during the World Cup, would cause us just unbelievable problems. And we haven't figured out a way, when a team puts us under that much pressure. Now, it's going to be difficult for any team that plays under that level of pressure, but we haven't figured out a way to pick the lock. I feel we look, the more that push defence comes on us, the less likely we are to do something new. And it becomes standing. It becomes Johnny Sexton standing at 10. And then passing from a standing spot, passing to Bundy, who I thought had an excellent game in defence yesterday in particular. But our centres were facing up to 3 defenders. There's just no space in that scenario. And I also think we put far too much of an onus on Conor Murray to kick box kicks. And most other teams kick 2 or 3 box kicks, maybe 2 box kicks a half. We tend to kick a huge number of them, and most other teams tend to base their kicking game around the 10, doing something a little bit different, and we don't. And so with Itoje being offside a lot of the time, but even when he wasn't, he was phenomenal. He was coming from depth and going high. The pressure that was put under all those kicks. So we never seemed to get anywhere beyond kicking it up, trying to catch it back, and then it became short pops. It's one of my bugbears. I think forwards should run from depth, should be able to pick an angle. And if I've mentioned this time and time before, Martin Johnson in the World Cup final a long, long time ago developed a line where he could see the ball going into his hands. So he's run almost in front of his players to try and catch the ball on an angle where the ball was always in his view. And if he was able to do that, he was not a natural ball carrier, not a power ball carrier, but he did it for the last 2 or 3 seasons because he needed to do something different. Too often we're standing still. You couldn't fault. I mean, for me, it's so frustrating watching the game yesterday, but we were lining up, running at guys who were ready to smash us, who had a really good defensive system. I thought our defensive system was actually very good, with the exception that we were vulnerable for a ball that was chipped over the top or along the ground. But we didn't try and do that against England. That's frustrating.
On those 2 kick-throughs, Liam, because I know in your piece, even pre-game for the Times, you highlighted England's prowess with the boot, and they picked Daly, they have Farrell, they Ford in the team, Ben Young's obviously kicked for the first try as well. So they have really a really varied and clever kicking game, especially when physically they're on top. So Ireland have their wingers high, and we have the full-back generally in the back field, which leaves that little bit of space open. Are you okay in theory with the wingers being high? And then if so, what needs to happen when that kick goes through? Like, in fairness, the Stockdale one, he had a 5, 6, 7 metre head start. He had turned. It was just indecision when he got there. But in general, how are we managing that aspect of the game?
Well, I think it's the first time we've faced such a variety of clever kicking. Like, there's no doubt I expected an enormous kicking game. Like, Eddie Jones is constantly giving out about Ireland's kicking, but England consistently outkick Ireland. But the difference, I think, yesterday was the various numbers that are doing it. Farrell is doing it forward, Scrum Half are doing it as well. Whereas we've an enormous, I think he referred to it there, enormous reliance on Conor Murray getting us out of jail. And he was doing so under enormous pressure, whereas England, like the value of getting a ball off the top of the line out and having Tulagi running in. There was one, I think his first major carry, he ran between Josh van der Fleer and Sexton. Yeah. He's over the gain line. So the piece that I'm disappointed from England's point of view, they could be scoring tries off those plays, but they're going to the kicking game because that seems to be what Eddie Jones wants them to do. And they're finding all sorts of different variances within it. I think it's up to Ireland then to react as best they can, and sometimes that comes from the coaching structure who are up in the stand and they can see it. Like where we're sitting in the press box, it's much easier to see that than when you're down the pitch. So I think that requires a little bit of adjustment. But the dominance around the gain line was so strong for England that they were able to pick and choose what they wanted to do next. And I think when you have that dominance, it doesn't really matter what you do. You're always going to get a better outcome than you would hope to do. And the flip side is, you look at someone like the winger, Jonathan Joseph. Can you recall in the 80 minutes him being asked to do anything because of his new field position? I don't think Ireland at any stage through a kicking game or indeed through a playing game were able to ask him a question. Yet the English picked us, and to your point, Joe, picked us several times where we were at our weakest and just poured down on top of it. You think of very early on, Conor Murray had to scamper right back and get the ball, and it saved another possible try as well, just by his hard work rate to get back there as well. So you'd have to applaud their kicking game, but you also have to caution that if they do switch to a running game at that point, that they're going to start scoring way more tries. Here's
something I'm confused about. I'll start with you, Liam, and both come in this. Across 2019, just leave age out of it for a second. This Irish team just felt sapped of energy. Like they looked old. Right across 2019, England and Dublin, even Rome, really low energy performance. Cardiff, the Grand Slam game, just, low energy, lacking in dynamism. And that carried through to the World Cup. You think of the Japan game, you think of the ultimate failure, just not able to enforce themselves on an opposition. And we had hoped that maybe that was behind us. But that, again, you would have to say, just a lack of oomph about the whole thing seemed to reoccur yesterday. Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know, is that size? Is that genetics? Is that players not playing enough rugby? Who knows? I mean, as opposed to being too tired. Because it's easy, Keith, to say, oh, well, maybe they just didn't get to the pitch of the game. But like I looked at CJ Stander and some Greco-Roman wrestling going on. I looked at James Ryan. He was fired up. I believe that team were fired up mentally, and yet it's not transmitting to the pitch at the moment for well over a year now, and I can't work out why.
Well, look, I think there's two different parts to it, and I'll go back on it. I think against, let's say, the top three teams or four teams, I think that's the game we had yesterday, and I think that's a different issue. I think on the other teams that we've played, we have come back. Our confidence was low after the World Cup, and we eked our way back to having a couple of steps forward in our confidence, and that's a really good place. But we got shown up by a team that blocked us from getting over the gain line. And the game is incredibly hard when that happens. And added to that yesterday then, as our 10 had his worst game in an Irish jersey. He played poorly yesterday, Sexton, and everything he did put him under increased pressure. So that's very, very tough. It is very, very tough in that instance. So I don't know that you can suddenly say that there is a solution to it, and whether the guys were jaded or whatever it was in last year in the World Cup. I think we have to say that this isn't an extension of it. We have to say that this is a new coach that's coming in. He hasn't made wholesale changes. He's looked at the team that he has coached or been part of the coaching panel, and he trusts some of them to do it. I think he trusted them for the first 2 matches, and they replayed his trust.
Yes.
And I think they did well with that. I think it becomes different now because you have to have a look and say, well, we know that against a team that blocks us, we are at sea, and we need to have solutions for that. And we didn't have any solutions yesterday.
Yeah, Liam, you might come in this whole area and maybe talk a little bit about personnel changes and what impact that will or won't have.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is as I was watching the opening, sitting on the halfway line, great seats, and you're just watching it unfold. Like, if we are to take, is the template as we watched it yesterday the English template, or is it we need to evolve our own current one? Because I don't see us having a Mario Itoje in the second row. I think as you start with the second rows, you say, well, what do we expect from them? And for far too long, we've had brilliant second rows, like phenomenal second rows, but none of them are doing what Mario Itoje is doing. None of them are marauding out in the middle of the park. None of them are adding a value around the ball that isn't very close to the breakdown. So there's an area that I think could be improved, that the front 5 can offer more, but particularly the second rows and indeed the back rows across the 70 metres of the pitch. And that's where someone like a Max Deegan in particular, or a Caelan Doris, has the footballing ability to be able, and is coming from the environment in Leinster where he's doing that week in, week out. And there's something that could definitely create a chaos in the English defence that one out carrying is simply not going. One out carrying from a standing start is simply not going to do. Particularly England were double teaming the ball carriers and smashing them back. That's definitely something. So I think a question at this stage is, A, we play 10 tests a year. 5 of them are typically against bigger, more powerful sides than ourselves, and 5 are kind of ourselves. So we really should be coming halfway in many cases, and we've been punching way above our weight for the last 10 years, and that deserves a huge amount of plaudits. So the question is, how do we judge success for Andy Farrell, who's only a few weeks in the job? Is this about preparing a journey to the next World Cup, which I think we should be doing? I think we should be way more forgiving at this stage to allow that potential outcome and allow us to reverse engineer then into where we want to be able to play rugby. And I think Ireland needs to move away from the physical one-out stuff and start creating a hybrid of kind of what the Scots and Irish could be doing and picking players that allow that type of outcome. We really struggle to get outside the English midfield defence. We really struggle to give opportunities to Conway, Earls when he came on, Larmer. So we're not, when we get into the trenches, we seem to get stuck in there and sucked in there, and we don't have the ability to pivot out of it. And I think that's one area I'd love to see Ireland do over the coming months as we head into the summer and beyond.
You mentioned Sexton, Keith. Let's talk about a few individuals. The schedule now is both a blessing and maybe a bit of a curse, because they'll have a gap week and that allows for a bit of rehabilitation of mood and everything else. And then presumably whatever team is picked will do a bonus point winning job against Italy at home. And then you don't quite know where you are in terms of France away, and the French may be going for a Grand Slam. So the likes of Cooney, Byrne, Doris, Keller, they all come in. Do you throw them in again in Paris is the question mark. Sexton, let's start with Sexton then. So as poor a game as he's had in an Irish jersey, you look at the strapping on his knee, he was very good against Wales. He was very good against Wales, and I prefaced that when I asked the next question. But when one of your best players is going 35 years old in May, it's different to a 27-year-old having a bad game. We have to be on constant watch now for when is it too far for a 34-year-old going on 35. Now, who's behind him is also the question. I mean, Joey Carberry is injured.
But that is the question.
Yeah.
That is the question, Joe. And I think if you look at our out halves at the moment, and look, I'm not going to say that you're entitled to have a bad game. You're not. You're not actually. Yeah. It's a very cold world, international sport. But he had a bad game. I wouldn't play him against Italy. Not for that reason, but I would actually say, okay, take the foot off the pedal there for a while. But he is our best out half, and I think there is quite a gulf between him and Ross Byrne, who is our next along the line. And I think we could be having a very different conversation if Joey Carberry was fit. But that's another problem because he is consistently not fit. He's had a lot of injuries, which is it's dreadful for all of us actually. And so yeah, we have a bit of a quandary in a few positions actually, and the guys are getting older or are injured or not hitting form, and we're struggling a little. So whereas Liam mentioned Max Deegan. I'm a huge Max Deegan fan. I would want to see Deegan play against to play against Italy, maybe against France, but I'm not sure. But I don't know that he's quite ready for that full level of physicality. Caelan Doris is ready in the morning, right? So there's no issue with that. They're different types of players, and whether we need to be able to have a mix-up of players that we pick slightly different teams for different levels of opposition, I don't know.
Yeah.
We do need a heavy carrying team. We do need a team that's able to mix it with everybody else. And we need to try and have our players playing. But if we played at full confidence yesterday, it would have been closer. I don't know that we would have beaten England. England were magnificent yesterday. Let's give them the credit that they absolutely deserve. The 2 tries that were scored were from, in my view, from Sexton and Stockdale, trying to play the ball as opposed to falling on the ball, as if they were going to catch it and kick it or, wait for it to go out or whatever. You have to, and when the ball goes over the line, you fall on the ball. Whatever it is, that's what you're trying to do. It didn't look like they were trying to do that. And that's just concentration, but that's not good enough because you need to be able to have a higher level of concentration in those games. But I don't know if I'm answering your question or not. I'm in a bit of a rant.
No, I understand. The Sexton point I take, and I'm going to put your back row point to Liam as well. And then Liam, start with Conor Murray. We'll come back to the back row in a second. The Murray-Cooney conversation is reopened now, isn't it? Yeah,
but again, I was talking on Friday about the importance of the recycle, the speed of the Irish recycle, and then the amount of creative options available to the scrum half. So it's irrelevant who the scrum half was.
Liam, sorry to interrupt. I mean, he started off with 2 great kicks, and then, frankly, the kicking was not good enough, and it led to the second try.
Yeah, but there's a cause and effect in everything, and Joe, and part of the cause that led to those effects that allowed Itoje to have such an impact around the box kicking and creeping offside and swimming along the rucks, etc., was that the Irish ball carrier and the recycle slowed down enormously in comparison to what it was like when we played against Wales a couple of weeks ago. And that has a monumental impact on the scrum half's ability to just carry out. And then the options available to him were much lower. So the overall performance of the half-backs was poor individually, but it was also impacted by the fact that the Irish forwards were being beaten up and the Irish forwards were carrying into double teams and getting knocked back. So to me, it would have been almost irrelevant who was the Irish scrum half at this point in time. But it does raise questions that we have to adjust our game and our style of game when we're playing against bigger sides, and 4 or 5 times a year we play against them, and we're now really proving that we have a game that isn't capable of getting away from that. So we need to start picking players that can affect that, and part of that is the back row and the balance of the back row. So who are the ball carriers yesterday? Who are going to get you out of trouble? The second rows weren't. The back row, CJ Stander was, but the other 2 aren't. And that's no disrespect to them as players. It's just they're not. So we have one really powerful ball carrier in our middle 5, and that impacts a huge amount. When you look at what England had, they had nearly all the ball carriers can make across the game line. So I think I would be of the mood to say I certainly think Andy Farrell and his management need huge patience, because they're a new style come in. The squad are happier. They're in a much happier place than they had been post the World Cup. Now we need to start picking players that can lead us to this type of game we need to play in order to be able to beat them. And some of the current players aren't that type. So therefore it raises questions around your half-backs, it raises questions around who your back row balances, and it raises a question around your second rows.
Are you advocating then, and I'm going to use extreme examples here, but I want to know which game you're advocating. Are you talking about Ireland moving more towards what Japan do? Or are you saying let's get some more big ball carriers into this Irish side and bulk it up?
I don't think we don't naturally have those break glass, emergency glass second rows, or these monsters. We don't have those guys. So what we have been playing in the last 2 years, even when we won the Grand Slam like a wonderful achievement. But if you think back to Paris in that drop goal, we must have carried about 1 million one-out carries in that game. And yes, we won that game, and we deserved to win the Grand Slam and the plaudits that came with it. But deep down, I certainly didn't believe that this was the future template for how Ireland's going to play. Deep down, I was like already nervous that we can't sustain this type of rugby. We don't have this ability in it, but we have ability, loads of it. But I just think that we're not necessarily getting the right balance in our selection that allows us to get players like Larmour more opportunities than he got yesterday, of which he got almost none. So that's the point I'm making, and that's why someone like a Max Deegan, like if you would say a Kieran Reid ring up the Irish coach 5 years ago and say, listen, I want to join Ireland for 5 years, I want to play. Now you have a number 8 who is teak tough but has skill set that can really transform how the tactics can be played. But it requires a different style of breakdown, a wider ruck, which is more vulnerable, which is chances of being pilfered, but that wider ruck splits the defence. So then the English blitz defence is a little weaker on the blind side because they don't have numbers. So we have to be thinking in that type of way, and that's how New Zealand have been thinking, and that's how they reacted to the Lions test win in the first test a few years back. They decided that they need to change where that point of attack is to allow their full back a proper pivot down a weaker defensive side. So we need to start thinking that way. How do we get this wall of 13 white jerseys who are pushing up aggressively on both sides? And you think of Larmour's try against Wales. Wales didn't push up aggressively on both sides, and they missed a tackle and he gets in. But England do. So how do you create the advantage in our case? And I think that's the conundrum that we have to work through and get to. We're not going to get through in this Six Nations. And I think I get a sense with Sexton being captain, was that a kind of a holding position captain to be reviewed at the end of the Six Nations, and are a lot of the positions holding positions to be reviewed at the end of it. So as we go into the summer and beyond, that can be diluted and taken, and there can be changes made to it. I get a sense that that's the journey we're on, and I think patience is required, but I would reverse engineer it. Who are the players that can actually give us this opportunity to play the way we could be playing to avoid the massive collisions that are really hurting us?
One other player I wanted to get your sense of, Keith, and maybe you see more when you're at the stadium as well, but the memories of 2018 when it comes to Jacob Stockdale cast a long shadow, and he has a lot of credit in the bank therefore, and he's young, and you got to give him a chance because he is the future still. You can still talk about him in those terms, but I don't know. Is the indecision he showed for the try, is that a microcosm where his game's at maybe generally, or is he doing okay?
Well, I think it's a microcosm of his game, but also our game. And if I just a tiny add-on to Liam's point, we hit the top billing at the end of 2018. We played incredibly well that year. We knocked over everybody that year, and we became right caught into the focus point for all the other teams of how to play against us and how to stop us. And in the last year and a half, the really good teams have figured out how to play against us, and we haven't made as much of a change in that period of time. Stockdale gets turned a lot now. He wasn't turned a lot in 2018. And if you remember rightly, and we discussed Stockdale in 2018 because people were saying, he let in a try, but he scored 2 tries. His defence isn't great. He was learning how to try and defend in white hot games, in international games. It's very, very tough. So I think what he actually did in 18 was remarkable. I think his second season in 19 was very difficult for him. He still was making some of the same mistakes, but he wasn't being given the latitude that he was getting in 2018. And I think it's a hard lesson for him. And I felt that he was over anxious for a lot of the game yesterday. He seemed to overrun the ball a lot yesterday. And I just felt he wished for that ball to go out rather than making certain of catching it, sprinting to catch it before it even bounced. You never leave a ball bounce if you can help it. And that's a really hard lesson for him to learn. And it may require a week or 2 on the sidelines for him to get his head back to it again, because his ascension to the top of the game was unbelievably sharp, and so you can fall down just as quickly. But he has an awful lot going for him. but he needs to tidy up elements of his game and maybe his concentration on the field. But I thought it was a really hard day for him, and he looked a little bit lost. He looked his age. He looked very young on that field yesterday. And but look, we know that he has skills. We know he's a really good finisher. We know that he has shown potential and has a huge amount of potential still to show. So if he gets dropped, if that was the case, it's for the right reasons, for him to come back as a better player. That's why it's different when you're talking about a guy who's 21 or 2 to a guy who's 34 or 5.
We are talking with Keith Wood and Liam Toland. Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, Team of Us, everyone in. Liam, let's smile for a minute. Let's turn to matters more joyful. So, at the other end of the spectrum to everything we've been talking about are this French team who went to Cardiff and won for the first time since 2010, who are on for the Grand Slam, who are probably favourites. I haven't checked, but favourites to do the Grand Slam, I would think. And there is a lot to like about this team.
There is absolutely, and it's some of the players they have are just, they're going to pose us so many more questions again, aren't they? So it's going to be, I think, certainly when you're looking forward to Paris, you're thinking about what is success. So what would be success for us in the next couple of weeks, the next couple of fixtures, and you have to take into account that it's going to be a really, really tough day for us in Paris. That doesn't mean we can't get a really good result, but isn't it just wonderful? Like, where have they been for the last 15, 20 years? It's just great to have them back, and it's great to have them back and winning. And I just, unfortunately, wasn't able to see the match live because we were playing the Ireland-England Legends game on Friday and Saturday in the Stoop. But it was just a cracking game when I look back in it. And it had all the hallmarks of it, because I think Wales are beginning to slide back from where they were, and they were vulnerable, and France are coming back to where they could be. So it was a great clash, and it was a wonderful game of rugby with some really, really quality passages to play. Has your body recovered yet? I played a sum total of 25 minutes, but I think I had a pint for every one of those minutes as well afterwards. So between that and this, it was a great occasion. About 5,000 people at it, so it was great for charity, and great for Thomas Smith, Keith Wood's old sparring partner on the Lions Tour '97. So it was all in aid of him and his journey. Very good. Keith Wood will have to make an appearance at one of these games soon. He's putting it off for long enough. No. Yes. I played my last game of rugby 17 years ago. I haven't played in any of that messing ever since. I'd be afraid the damage I'd do to myself, no mind anybody else. On France, I mean, look, all the youth coming through is very exciting. Yeah, they're brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it is. Look, we've been bemoaning that for years. And they play like France can play, and it is exhilarating, and it can blow up, and they accept that fact because they've taken very bold steps, but they've been done with a very good structure under Bernard Laporte. They have put the best defensive coach around in Sean Edwards. They have 2 former French captains who have a lot of coaching and managerial experience. They've put a full new S&C system in around them, which is unusual for France, if we're honest. And their view is to win the World Cup in 4 years' time, 3 years' time now. And so they have gone for youth. And they can go for youth because they have a huge amount of talent at their disposal. And these are all kids that have come through playing professional outfits for a number of years. And they have a lot of power in their team. If it's that mixture of... so for me, I'm not saying that Ireland have to copy France. I don't think we could copy France. But they are mixing up big, powerful players with small guys. There's a joy to watch some of the tiny guys that are in the French backline, because we all grew up playing a game that suited all shapes and sizes, and you're beginning to see that embodiment in France. And France had gone away from it. France went to I wouldn't even call it power, I'd have called it a strength and heavy hitting game for 10 or 15 years, and it actually just didn't play into their psyche. They want to have a cut. Yeah. They want to have a cut from everywhere. And look at the joy on their face when they're doing it. It's something to behold. Yeah, and just a final point, Liam. I don't know if you got to watch the full 80, but certainly watching the game live, Wales probably aren't what they were last year, and the Gatlin departure is seismic, and we'll have to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. But still, the residual muscle memory kicked in, and they put in a big second half, and they were on top in that second half.
And what was almost most promising from a French point of view is the resolve they showed. There was a resilience about the way they hung on in that game.
Well, I think that's the story of it, isn't it? Because you hear all the story of when Irish players go across, or Irish coaches go across, the frustration they have with the French culture. Well, there couldn't be anything more opposite than Sean Edwards and the French culture. And to see the maturity with which they clearly, I have no idea of this, but it appears in the pitch how maturely they have accepted Sean Edwards into their fold, and all the changes that Keith's just mentioned tells me that there's a realisation within that relatively young group of players that they have been underperforming, and in order to get to the level of winning a World Cup, like the 1 or 2 extra degrees requires a whole new maturity about how they need to play, and they need to embrace the modern, like what we're comfortable with in Ireland, that has been driving rugby in Ireland for the last 10, 15 years. Like the French are beginning, it appears from the players, beginning to really embrace this opportunity, and to see how they kept England out in Paris, and now how they battle against Wales away from home, shows that they have embraced it all, and that's a real dangerous thing. But it's great for us, for me, certainly watching them. It's absolutely fantastic, and it just seems that they have realised that they can spend the next 20 years wasting their talent, but they look like a group who are very intent on doing exactly what Keith said, which is win the next World Cup.
Yeah, well, they are Murrayfield and Ireland in Paris away from a Grand Slam, so we'll see how it all unfolds. Keith, Wood, Liam Toland, thanks, fellas, appreciate it.
Cheers, Joe.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.